Hello, comrades. Today, Jack Conrad will be given a political report on behalf of the Provisional Central Committee of the Communist Party of Great Britain, focusing on Trump's tariff wars and the shape of the financial order, lasting around 1 hour. Then we'll go to comments and questions. Please click raise hand at the bottom of your screen if you have a question, and we can turn you into a panelist. And you don't have to switch your camera on if you don't want to. Okay, Jack.
Thanks very much, Jake. Yeah, I'm going to begin with the tariffs. It's all pretty predictable. We've had, most notably, I suppose, steel, aluminium, 25%, as far as I know, across the board. I suppose it's just worthwhile mentioning in that context, just listening to I would have thought a reasonably representative radio interview on BBC 4 with a US steelworker, union official, and a British steelworkers representatives from South Wales, Tata. And the US guy said, well, we really welcome this. We've been, had our backs against the wall for years and years, and Trump's come to our rescue. And the brother from South Wales said, well, I understand your position, but the danger is that our steel plant will close, and I wish our government would do something along these lines. You can see this sort of dilemma for steel workers, and indeed it's going to be the same of workers in every country. The danger is that we're organized behind our ruling class, our governments, against each other, that we're calling upon them to impose tariffs against other companies, but also against other workers. And of course, the problem is, at least as far as I see it at the moment, it's not that the United States is all powerful. It isn't, and it never has been, but it is powerful still. It is still the global hegemon, and it's got more cards in its hand, or it's got higher cards in its hand in terms of this particular game that's being played out. And you can see that by countries responding to the 25% tariff, and then Trump instantly upping the ante. So Europe responds by tariffing various US commodities, and straight away Trump is in there. What was it with alcohol, with wine, 200% levy. We saw what happened. I think it was with Ontario in Canada. The governor in Ontario, or the head of government in Ontario, responded to Trump's tariffs by saying, okay, we're going to slap on tariffs to US goods that come over the border into our state in Canada. Trump instantly responds, with swinging tariffs. The governor collapses. And then they have negotiations. So I'm not saying for 1 second that the US is all powerful. There will be give and take, but most giving will be done by the non-United States, and the most taking will be done by the United States. Now, I'm not claiming anything here. I'm just illustrating something, just looking at the stock markets. This is the last time I read them. They could have changed. So I think this was Friday I looked at them. Either way, the Dow index was down 0.2%. On the other hand, Standard & Poor top 500 was up 0.5%. But there are those, and I don't think they're wrong, that says everyone is a loser in such tariff wars. So certainly, I think those who talk about Germany, not only remaining in recession, but going deeper into recession are right. What's going to happen with Volkswagen? What's going to happen to the German auto industry? I was just reading earlier today that France is officially in stagnation. What's going to happen there? One would assume that it goes from stagnation to actually dropping in terms of the level of production. And one can repeat the same story, virtually without exception. I might be wrong, but I would suggest under these circumstances, China is vulnerable to some sort of Japaneseification, i.e., being pushed into stagnation. I've read the article in this week's Weekly Worker by Michael Roberts. It's got lots of useful information, but the idea that what passes for central planning is going to allow China to defy the laws of gravity. I'm not convinced on that one. But of course, what applies to China, what applies to Germany, what applies to Canada above all? I mean, I think something like 80% of Canada's exports go to the United States. What applies to these countries also applies to the United States. So Donald Trump, for the first time, at least as far as I'm aware, has talked about the possibility in the United States of pain. There will be pain, but he promises that it will be worth it. So some sort of downturn in the stock exchange, some sort of stagnation, some sort of recession, far from impossible. If we look at the late 1920s, tariff wars weren't exactly unassociated with the crash and the long depression that followed it. So who knows? But yes, the United States will also experience pain. But as they say, I know it's a tired old cliche, but when the United States sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold. Well, when the United States gets a cold, then what we're talking about is influenza as far as the rest of the world is concerned. So things look bleak for the world economy as far as I see it. And therefore, we have to ask the question that given that it's supposedly we all lose, what's the rationale behind it? If you're just determined to reduce the living standards and the profits of your own citizens and punish the others, what's the purpose of it? And what I'm going to say here is going to be very, very tentative, and it's said with very little confidence that this is actually what's going to happen. But at least I think it might cast some light on what is intended to take place. And this is the result of me not doing vast research or anything like that. No, I've read two articles in the Financial Times by Gillian Tate. I think she might be the US editor of the Financial Times. We've got to remember that the Financial Times isn't an English paper or a British newspaper. It's much more a transatlantic paper with a very considerable readership in the United States amongst the business and political class. Either way, she's well connected in terms of American big business and American politics. So she's very tentative, but I think she's worth reading on this question. What is going on? What is the plan? What's the Trump rationale in all of this? And what she's suggesting is that what Trump and his advisors have in mind is redrawing the architecture of the world economy, but including the world financial economy. And she talks about, well, in 1985, there was the Plaza accord. Long and the short of that was that Japan was forced into taking a massive hit. She thinks that at least what is being talked about is a Mar-a-Lago accord that would effectively depreciate the dollar, or shall we put it, depreciate the dollar, depreciate the US debt to those that hold the dollar. So the paradox is, I was talking to comrades in my cell, in my party cell on Friday, and we were talking about tariffs. And when we bring up the question of economic uncertainty and everyone taking a hit, comrades were asking, like why? My answer was that, well, in the middle of economic uncertainty, where does money flow to? And the answer is, of course, even if the United States is in trouble, money flows into the United States because it's the global hegemon. And what is being proposed in the light of, and again, I haven't read up enough, so I'm really just following Gillian Tate here, following the ideas of one Michael Pettis. He's talking about taxing capital inflows. So you would expect tariffs to result in an inflow of capital into the United States from Germany, Japan, China, and all the rest of it. That's how things would go. And he's saying, don't let this happen without us taking a slice. Now, the figures shouldn't be taken seriously. Nonetheless, the scale of what we're talking about can be conveyed by his estimate that over a decade, if you did that, the US could be up by $2 trillion, which over a decade is a lot for you and me, a lot for most countries. It's not a huge amount, but it's a significant amount. But this is what seems to be at least being proposed and perhaps being accepted. She describes the situation around Trump consisting of three factions. Two of them favor such a course and one doesn't. We don't know, in other words, what the result will be, but this is at least a possibility, and it would make sense for us to at least look at it, because it helps us to understand at least what the bigger picture is of this tariff war that I've already described. The idea would be, not only do you get a slice of the capital coming in, what you do is you actually suppress the value of the dollar. What you do is suppress what they call, this is Pettis, this economist that Gillian Tett is quoting, you reverse what she calls, or this Michael Pettis calls, the excessive financialization of the US economy. So the idea would be that you reshore steel production, aluminium production, the production of a huge number of different enterprises that have been offshored with financialization. And with a weaker dollar, you get a stronger industry. In other words, US steel, US aluminium, US commodities become cheaper, therefore they can be made in the United States, sold in the United States, and also exported from the United States. So there's also an idea as part of this Mar-a-Lago accord to actually, as I said, devalue US debt, not just in the shape of devaluation of the dollar, but actually transforming dollar debts into government bonds. In other words, the United States would effectively default on its present debt. That would be the effect of it. So those that have assets in the United States wouldn't be stripped of it, but the value their assets in the United States would be devalued, not only in dollar terms, but in global terms as well. So the argument is that dominance, US dominance, will continue, and indeed US dominance will be asserted. US decline will be reversed. And again, going hand in hand with this guy Pettis, apparently J.D. Vance is an admirer of his economics. The idea would be that you then divide, this is what I read in Gillian Tett, you divide the world into three categories. The red category would be foes. These are people that you don't like. Then there will be the greens. These are people who are friends, and you offer friends military protection, and you offer them tariff relief, presumably with something in return. And then there's the yellow category. And this would be, well, people who might have been friends and people who might have been foes, but you've done a deal with. In other words, you could imagine the United States doing a deal with China. Maybe you can't. Either way, China either falls into the red category, or perhaps if it does a deal, it would fall into the yellow category. Now, as I said, I'm not able to comment. I know, I mean, Gillian Tett says, well, mainstream economists think that this is mad, can't work. She's much more cautious on that. She goes, it might work, might not work. They might implement it, they might not implement it. But the reason I thought I'd introduce it is because it at least gives us some sort of rationale behind the tariff wars. And what she says is that there's internal logic to this proposal. In other words, it isn't Donald Trump shooting himself in the foot, just doing damage to the US economy. There's a bigger picture. And I think the bigger picture, working out what the bigger picture is, if there's a bigger picture, is important for us, absolutely vital, actually, for us at the present time. You can certainly say one thing for sure, and that is things are changing in a very big, and I would argue very unpredictable manner, because it isn't just reliant on the United States. Yes, it's a superpower, it's a super imperialism, but is China going to be an easy pushover? What about Europe? Aren't they going to do something about it? I think Canada's very vulnerable, but is it just going to take it and give in and say, okay, let's become the 51st state? I don't know, but there's a good possibility that they will resist and upend the easy. All America needs to do is click its fingers and everyone else jumps into line. And I think that this also then at least provides some sort of background to interrogating what's going on in Ukraine or about Ukraine at the present time. We've had a series of meetings in Saudi Arabia. We've also seen Trump's representative apparently kept waiting 8 hours to see Vladimir Putin. I'm sure he was on the phone to his boss and would be asking permission just to walk out. Obviously, that wasn't given. He was, I don't know, standing about, but waiting for 8 hours before ushered in to the glorious presence. So it's clear that Vladimir Putin is playing a very neat game of poker. How much he's got in his hand, that's a different question, but he's clearly playing it very well. He's playing it cool. I might want peace, I might not. I can carry on. I'm not going to get, bowled over by offers of joining or the recreation of the G8. I'm not going to break my alliance, with China over this offer from Trump. No, he's playing it very cool, very stony faced, and that's a skillful gameplay. But as I say, how much he's got in his hand, that's a very different matter. It's not automatic that the FSB Putin regime survives. My own take on it is it's a very vulnerable regime. Either way, we've had these negotiations. The initial opening in terms of these negotiations has been pretty predictable. It didn't take a genius to work out that America could knock Zelensky and Ukraine into line. We saw it played out in front of cameras, in terms of the Oval Office. I think it's called the spray, as they let the press ask questions before formal meetings. The formal meeting didn't happen. Zelensky was simply dismissed. And then Zelensky goes back to Kiev and falls into line. I don't know. We haven't had the rare earth and the rare metals deal, but it seems to be that Ukraine will come up with shed loads of concessions to the United States, will concede whatever the protests are, 20% of its territory. What then happens in terms of domestic politics? That's a different question. But I've argued, even if there was an Azov coup, they would still be faced with the same global realities as Zelensky. So maybe Zelensky gets overthrown in an election. Maybe he gets overthrown from a march, by a march on the capital. Either way, where do you get your planes from? Where do you get your tanks from? Where do you get your financing from? Where do you get your satellite communication from? Where do you get your information from? And the idea that Europe can easily substitute, I've argued, is illusory. I've sort of repeated the figure, but I think it's worthwhile repeating. It sort of surprised me, but didn't surprise me, that if we take all the aid that Europe has given in terms of arms over the last 3 years, which has been a lot. Remember, they always keep emphasizing it on the BBC, more than the United States. Europe has given more than the US. But if we take in euro terms, dollar terms, pound terms, in money terms, what's interesting is that in money terms, only 20% of it originated in Europe. So I'm presuming that the bulk of that is accounted for by F-16s. I'm just making that up. I haven't investigated it. Either way, we've had it illustrated just recently, not what happens to Ukraine, but the power of the United States when it comes to information, i.e. Starlink can be switched off. And of course, the United States did deny satellite information. That means not that they're particularly important, but if you take Storm Shadow, the British missile, the Anglo-Italian French missile that in Britain is called Storm Shadow, to deliver that with super accuracy, it relies on US satellites. If we take drone strikes, if we take missile strikes by Ukraine, it can use GPS, but its military GPS is US. Anyway, the point is still there, that even with a new regime, it faces the same military and strategic realities as the Zelensky regime. So yes, you could imagine the war becoming asymmetrical and some sort of guerrilla struggle taking place. But if you want to maintain a World War I, I'll call it a stalemate for shorthand. If you want to maintain that, you really are reliant at the end of the day on US power, because the US not only has power when it comes to space, it also has power when it comes to Europe as well. Okay, so what is going on with Europe and Ukraine? Again, what I'm saying here is very provisional, very uncertain. Maybe what's going on, and we've heard indications of it from Keir Starmer, from France, that in spite of the objections of and what's his name, anyway, the Russian foreign minister and the FSB Putin regime, Europe will put boots on the ground, whatever the objections of Russia. And therefore, what you end up with is effectively the front line of NATO. It wouldn't be called NATO, but effectively the front line of NATO not only touches upon Russian borders, around the Baltics and with now with Finland, but also runs down throughout the front line, 800 miles front line, and one presumes further around with Belarus. That becomes effectively NATO, and it's European powers that would pay for that. It's European armies that would staff that. And in terms of the extra arms spending that America has been demanding, remember 2%, now 2.5%, 3%, 4%, 5% has been mentioned. The bulk of that, at least possibly, will come from Europe transferring money to American arms manufacturers. So Macron has talked about a European answer here. That would be slow, that would be difficult. On the other hand, Starmer showing lack of European unity. Starmer has talked about placating Trump. Either way, another argument or another related argument is this idea of the United States radically subordinating Europe to the United States in the sort of manner that Trotsky speculated about in the early 1920s, having looked at Europe being balkanized. He was talking about the United States really treating Europe effectively as a neo-colony. There wouldn't be loads of US troops in Europe, but Europe would be not independent. Europe would be dependent on the United States and would be expected to pay for that privilege in the same way as Ukraine is paying for that privilege in terms of the Trump plan when it comes to rare earths and metals. And again, just to finish on that, worthwhile quoting the statistic, and that is if you take reparations, which is meant, Ukraine's meant to be a friendly power that were imposed on Germany under the terms of the Versailles Agreement, Ukraine will be paying a higher percentage of its gross national product to the United States. And I think that gives you something of the flavor of what the United States has in store for Britain. And therefore, when I read the social imperialist press, lo and behold, no surprise that you have equivalent on the front page. The United States is selling out Ukraine. Europe must come up and supply the weapons to defend Ukraine. And then you'll have on the back page, no to cuts, no to austerity. In other words, the social imperialist press thinks you can have guns and butter. You can't. There is a choice, and it was inevitable. I have to say, it wasn't hard to predict that it wouldn't just be the foreign aid budget that went. No wonder Annalisa Dodds resigned. She had no money. She was head of a department that was there for talking the talk. It couldn't walk the walk. Half the budget, as I understand it, or something along those lines, was already allocated to hotel owners, asylum seekers internally in Britain. The rest of her budget was taken away. She walks. It was inevitable. We don't know yet what's going to be in the next budget. My guess for what it will be cuts in terms of welfare benefits. Whether they're going to go for PIP, whether they're going to go for old fogies like me, pensioners, are they going to go for the NHS? I don't know. More difficult. Either way, there will be welfare cuts, and money will go into arms spending, and a good chunk of that arms spending will make its way into US companies and improve their performance on Wall Street and all the rest of it. So anyway, that's just a comment there. I think just as a footnote to that, worthwhile commenting on Kursk. It looks like Russian troops will retake it. Whether they go any further into Ukraine, that depends if Ukraine's put in defensive positions. They've been very good at, spending money on defensive lines that ain't there. In other words, there's plenty of examples of corruption, one presumes, going from a very low level all the way to the top when it comes to, to dragon's teeth, when it comes to trenches, when it comes to putting in place barbed wire tank traps and all the rest of it. I wouldn't put this down to the US. I'm sure the US cutting off deliveries for a short time and spy information made some difference. But the reality is that Russia's been piling on the pressure. We've not only had, I don't know how effective they've been. You can read reports that they were brilliant or reports that they were useless, North Korean troops. But we also know that elite troops were diverted from the south, were thrown in to this battle. But I wouldn't be surprised, if the decision hadn't been made to scuttle. Either way, again, just as a footnote to a footnote, just sort of throw into it. I was reading a report in the Daily Telegraph. Make of it what you will. Russia's got a new drone. Nothing particularly exciting about that. But this drone, actually, I was going, what? It's actually connected by wire with the operator, which apparently, at least at the moment, makes it invulnerable. I think it's called a Rubicon, makes it invulnerable just for the moment to electronic jamming, and hence its extreme success on the battlefield. Now, how much longer that advantage lasts, how long it takes for technology to develop to jam it or whatever, I don't know. Either way, there's lots of film of Bradley fighting vehicles and other Ukrainian armored vehicles and lorries being blown up by these particular drones. Okay, moving on, we're at 34, so sort of starting to wind things down. Just thought I picked up yesterday, I was on the demonstration along with a team of Wheatley worker comrades, and amongst the literature I picked up, I read this paper and that paper, but this is a little leaflet that was given to me by a comrade in the CPGB ML. And what attracted me particularly to it when I read it is it fitted in with what I've called the sort of Panglossian left. The Panglossian left, I think, when it comes to Ukraine, its version of events is that Russia's doing splendidly. NATO is rubbish. NATO is just about to fall apart. The United States is a busted flush. And although they don't say it, forward on Vladimir Putin, some sort of, this version of BRICS and a multipolar world, and that would be so much, better for us, apparently. Either way, you have Panglossianism when it comes to Ukraine, as far as the pro-Kremlin left is concerned. But you also, I think, sadly, have a sort of Panglossian view when it comes to Israel stroke Palestine. The left sort of strangely combines this view that we're on the edge, which I share. We're on the edge when it comes to Palestine of a second Nakba, a second catastrophe, a second mass expulsion of people, first of all from the Gaza Strip, but also the West Bank. So thus far, under Operation Iron Wall, which gets very little publicity, at least from the BBC, the mainstream media, we've had 40,000 people displaced, 1,000 people killed. My fear is that if the Daily Telegraph is right, and, again, it's not set in stone, and there's an attack either by Israel and by the United States on Iran, either just on their nuclear facilities or some bomb them back into the Stone Age operation, that will be used by Israel, the Netanyahu coalition government, as their excuse to go in for a second Nakba, which I would myself say that sort of has elements both of ethnic cleansing, but also elements of a genocide. Those that don't go, let them starve or we kill them. That's my fear. So in the Weekly Worker, we illustrated the situation, at least in terms of my fear, by taking the standard meme of what's happened to Palestine since 1947, with pockets of, Zionist colonization, Tel Aviv and various other bits that were bought up, paid for by the colonists, to the situation with independence. And then you get into a situation where you still have the Gaza Strip, but the West Bank consists of a series of Indian reservations, call it what you want. So you've got an open prison on the one side, and then a series of. Someone needs to mute, if you could, please. Please, if you could mute someone. Very difficult to talk with background. If you take that situation, my fear is that what we end up is with our fifth panel of people being cleared out, and there being no Palestinian Authority, no Palestinian control over the Gaza Strip. And of course, just to emphasize the point, I do not take the Trump plan as a joke. I take it deadly serious, because it isn't about the United States taking it over. It's not about the United States and Jared, his son-in-law. Maybe they make a fortune, but why Netanyahu was standing next to him beaming as he announced his Riviera plan was because he recognized the truth of it, and that is giving the green light to the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population. In Trump's words, we'll move them out while we redevelop, but we won't allow them to return. So they're talking about Sudan, they're talking about Somalia, they're talking about Somaliland. There's always the Sinai. Egypt wouldn't like it, but you dump them. Are they going to shoot them as they come over the border? I don't know. Maybe they do. But Netanyahu wouldn't shed a tear if that happened. So the left combine that, which I think is an accurate warning. This isn't just, hyperbole. They combine that with some sort of Panglossian view of what's going on, because they misunderstand what the war aims of Netanyahu and the coalition government, and they take it on, surface appearance. So Netanyahu is conducting a war to eliminate Hamas. He's conducting a war to rescue the hostages. Well, they haven't got all the hostages back. The war captives got some back, but Netanyahu was never concerned with that. That's what the relatives, the friends, the supporters have been saying on demonstrations in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. They know that Netanyahu isn't serious about that. He views that as a domestic nuisance. And nor would any general, and they've been saying it to the extent they're allowed to have freedom of speech, serving generals. We can't destroy Hamas. It's a political movement, and so it doesn't surprise me when we hear figures that for every militant that's been killed, we have one replacement, either in Gaza or the West Bank, or Palestinians joining in Jordan or Lebanon or wherever else they happen to be. That doesn't surprise me. Anyway, here we are back to my friends in the CPGBML. Quote, the current ceasefire in Gaza signals a heavy defeat for the Zionist settler colonial regime in Israel and for its imperialist masters in the USA and Britain. My memory of these negotiations was of Trump strong-arming Netanyahu into going for this ceasefire. It wasn't something, in my view at least, I saw, the Israeli cabinet going, Jesus Christ, we've lost so, but this is the version of events with our comrades. Facing unsustainable losses and demoralization in its armed forces, as well as a deep economic crisis and social breakdown, the Zionist regime has been forced to retreat. It's not my reading of it. Of course, Netanyahu has had difficulties. Of course, they've had losses. But if you look at his opinion poll ratings, no surprise, in the middle of this struggle, they've gone up, haven't crashed down. Is the United States saying we've suffered such a heavy blow? No, the United States is talking about clearing out the Palestinians from Gaza. I take that, as I said before, I take that seriously. You can't have your cake and eat it. If we're talking about the danger of ethnic cleansing, if we're talking about the danger of genocide, we can't combine that with victory for the forces of resistance. The forces of resistance can lose sometimes. The reason why people have turned to Hamas is out of desperation, not out of strength. And we shouldn't expect, the SWP still goes on about it, that the Palestinians will lead their own liberation in the whole of Palestine, get rid of the Zionist state. This is delusional. The Palestinians haven't got the strength. Israel is a hugely strong military power, not least because it's backed to the hilt by US imperialism. True, Israel, when it comes to the court of international opinion, is a pariah. And that's why we certainly say there has to be a wider solution. And we don't think the defeat of the Palestinians is by any stretch of the imagination inevitable, but in isolation, yes, it is. And therefore, I ended my article. I knew I'd heard it from the SWP, and I'd heard it from Tony Cliff, this slogan about, the route to Palestinian liberation was through Riyadh, through Amman, through Cairo. I looked it up, or found the origin of it. It's George Habash, first General Secretary of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and going back before that, the first chair of the PLO. We should have that slogan. So I think we should use that slogan, the route to working class unity in Palestine is actually through the Arab Revolution, but an Arab revolution led by the working class that can offer the Israeli Jewish working class, the Hebrew working class, something better than being a labor aristocracy that's having many of its privileges eroded or taken away from it, over the last 20 or 30 years or so. And just to take up my remaining minutes, Jake, two more things. First of all, a quick comment on the abolition, Labour government, the abolition of NHS England. NHS England is different to NHS Wales, NHS Scotland. And basically what Wes Streeting is doing is incorporating the bureaucracy, the administration of the NHS into the Department of Health. That's what's going on. This isn't sacking doctors, nurses, people doing your X-rays, GPs, or anything along those lines. Now, of course, the trade unions will object to this abolition of the NHS because it involves thousands and thousands of job losses. How real that is, I'm not able to judge, because it's all very well saying you're getting rid of a load of administrators, but then don't you need to take on administrators to run the NHS inside the Department of Health? Who knows? I suspect there will be many examples of that, but that doesn't mean that we would simply dismiss this question as a trade union dispute. Of course, we would defend workers. We want to see them properly treated. We wouldn't want to see them thrown out on the street or anything like that. But there is a sinister side to it. And my own take on it is well, what is Wes Streeting's plan for the NHS? And going back to my first remarks about the reordering of the world by Trump, we all know that Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and I would guess Wes Streeting, i.e. the Labour government, wants to do a deal with Trump. It wants to be categorized in get my colours right, the green category. And I think one of the sacrifices that the Labour government will make will be us having chlorinated chicken in our supermarkets supplied by US agri industry. I'm not going to eat it, but many people will, because it will be very cheap compared with what we're used to. But another thing that I think we'll find is the already heavily privatized NHS is basically opened up to US health companies. And my fear is that with that, we get US, or even more US irrationality. We all know that in the US, life expectancy is either stagnated or has declined. We all know that the United States spends a fortune on health, and yet gets an extraordinarily poor return for it. Again, anecdotally, I've heard many stories of people being brilliantly treated in the US health system. They go in with something like a, ingrowing toenail, and they're given every test under the sun. The problem is, even if you've got full insurance, on the other hand, precisely because of the overuse of tests, and we're going to test you for everything approach of US hospitals in order to get insurance money, very often, even with the best coverage, when it comes to you paying your dividends and having a well-paid job, there can be a dispute between the insurance company and the hospital. And the insurance company turns around and says, we're not going to pay for that. And then you as an individual, you're in hell. And even if you're a well-off individual with employment, with insurance, the insurance company doesn't pay, and the hospital is after you to pay tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And people are just despairing under those circumstances. So my own experience, I'm healthy, I'm fit, but I've had experience, for example, of the NHS recently. Comrades who know me for a few years will say, what's different about that Jack Conrad guy? Normally he's like that. Now I don't need glasses, thanks to private laser treatment paid for and supplied by the NHS. So yeah, I'm grateful for that, but there's an irrationality that will come for us, and we end up getting US health and US results and spending a huge more amount of money. So that's what I fear with this NHS move. So yes, of course, it's about job losses, but there's a bigger agenda, I think, to this. The last point just wanted to let comrades know that one of our comrades, valuable comrades, Eddie Ford, anyone who reads the Weekly Worker will know our Eddie, very reliable. Every bloody week he produces an article on any subject we ask him to write. He's not an expert, but he's a bloody good journalist because he can turn his hand to anything. Well, he won't be doing anything for the next at least few weeks. He's had a stroke, which is really bad news. But the good news is I've just been in contact with him, is that he's on recovery mode. He was rushed into hospital. This is March the 8th. He's now out of hospital, and he hopefully will be back writing within the month. So what I'd ask comrades to do, if you don't know his address, if you don't know his email address, and you want to send him a message and say how much you appreciate him, write into Weekly Worker, Peter Manson, the editor, will pass on your best wishes. So I just wanted to say also, Danny, Eddie, best wishes from me, and I think I can speak on behalf of Online Communist Forum this week as well. So speedy recovery, Eddie Ford. That's it. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, comrades, we're moving into the discussion segment of the forum now. If you could raise your hand if you have a question or comment. On my screen, that's just to the left of the share button. I don't know where it will be on yours. So far, we only have one hand. I just want to quickly ask a question myself. I don't know if you've come across it, but I wonder if you had any thoughts on reshoring this idea of freedom cities that Trump seems to have been floating for the past couple of years. It's like apparently the groups that are pushing this have been meeting with representatives from the White House. I don't know how serious it is at all. I came across this thing, Prospera in Honduras, that Peter Thiel financed, and all this kind of stuff. But I don't know how likely that is. But I guess it would be an easier way to do massive deregulation rather than going federal down and having these little pockets. So we've got one attendee, one panelist. That attendee could be moved to a panelist. So I guess we'll take Ben Cozens for now. Mike's raised his hand. Ben, if you could unmute.
Unmute again. I think I've unmuted. Can
Yeah.
I now be heard? I can't hear, but can I be?
Yes, you've been demuted,
do it elsewhere.
Ben. We can hear you.
I see little green bubbles on my microphone, so I assume I can be heard. I'd like to thank Jack for his wide-ranging and very judicious picture of this week's world. There's the odd irony popping up, of course. The arrest of Duterte has been headlined by the NATO ideologists as the first leading politician in Asia to have had such an arrest warrant issued against him. The joke, of course, is that you may not have noticed Israel is not in Europe. Think that through for a bit and see what grotesque hypocrites these NATO ideologists are, failing again. I'm having another look at the Guardian this time. 2 days ago, I think, Starmer warns. Well, our great enemy, of course, the enemy's at home, the man who can call in perhaps 60 or 70,000 of our well-armed legionnaires to block the new Russian Vladimir Hitler, complains that Putin may fiddle around with the details of signing the deal. On page 4 of the same Guardian, we see that Herr Starmer is fiddling around with how to operationalize the deal. There's very little space for these people to sink any lower. Jack mentions the possible instability of the FSB Putin regime. Um, I just don't know. Nor, of course, does Jack, nor indeed, for all I know, does Putin. But what sort of forces are more likely to replace Putin should he be seen as, for example, paltering to the NATO forces? Cast your mind back to 53 uh, uh, when it is reputed that the reason Lavrenti Beria, who knew lots, of course, being head of the KGB, I think it was at the time, had some privileged information about what was happening in East Berlin with the serious workers' uprising. He said, it's alleged, give in. So Nikita Savich pulled a big revolver out of his holster and shot him there at the Politburo. And I think if anybody's likely to replace Putin and his Foreign Minister Lavrov, a man in the good mold of perhaps Gromyko and certainly Molotov, it's likely to portray Putin as following Gorbachev and Yeltsin in paltering about resisting NATO expansion. And I know very little about current Russian politics, and I'm out of date in invoking perhaps Zhirinovsky and his allies. But be careful what you imagine. And I think Jack is right to foresee the possibility of an Azov Banderite coup, but failing the same constraints which I think we all know do not apply